My mother, Ivy Rose, died a couple of months ago, and I wanted to put together a video telling a little bit of a life story. It wasn't unexpected that she died. In fact, we'd been expecting it for about 5 years, but I was shocked how hard it hit me when eventually it happened. This is a picture of Ivy when she was just married in 1946 to her husband Hugh. Unfortunately, she didn't like having her photograph taken, and so I don't have that many pictures of her, which is a real shame. She was a very beautiful woman, as you can tell from this picture. She was born in East London, in Norwich Road. This is a picture of how that house now looks today, but imagine it back in the 1930s, with her mother, father, and 7 siblings living in this tiny little place. It must have been very crowded. Her father drove a tram in the 1920s and became a cab driver in the 1930s. This is the earliest picture I have of her. She's there on the right with her mother standing behind her, and to the left is her Aunt Lena and her cousin Bertie. It might not appear so from this picture, but Aunt Lena was one of the most fun-loving and funny people that you could possibly have met. This picture was taken in front of the Royal Pavilion Hotel in Dover on one of their family outings. As I said, they lived in East London, and that could not have been very pleasant in those days. It was a very poor neighbourhood, and they had poor schools. I think my mother could have actually qualified to go to college if she'd had better schooling, but she did show an aptitude for numbers. And so when she left school, she got a job as an accountant at Moss Brothers in London. Now back then the English money was not decimalised, and it was not a simple system. 2 farthings equals a halfpenny, 2 halfpennies equals a penny, 3 pennies equals a threepence, 2 threepences equals a sixpence, 2 sixpences equals a shilling, 2 shillings equals a florin, 2.5 shillings equals a half crown, 5 shillings equals a crown, 20 shillings equals a pound, and 21 shillings equals a guinea. So it's not trivial to add up numbers in this particular system. Now on the right is a typical pound, shillings and pence ledger. Now my mother could take a pencil and just run it down that list of numbers about as fast as you can read them, and she'd write a number at the bottom. Then she'd go from the bottom to the top again and write another number, and if those 2 numbers were the same, she'd move on because they would both be right. That's probably where I get my mathematical ability from. Well, World War II broke out in 1939. My mother was in London for the Blitz. She tells of coming out of the air raid shelters and looking up at the sky at the vapour trails that would last for hours afterwards, trying to figure out how many German planes were shot down and how many British planes had been shot down. When she was old enough, she joined the Women's Royal Air Force and was trained at RAF Innsworth in Gloucestershire. After her training was complete, she was stationed at Cambridge. She tells of how much she used to love being in Cambridge. She used to go to the choir practices and listen to them sing hymns and carols. I think she also got a taste of the academic life that she missed if she'd only had better schooling, which made her all the more determined that I should do well academically. One thing that worked out very well for her in Cambridge was she met her future husband Hugh, and they then moved back to Devonshire with Hugh's parents. They owned the pub, the Bell Inn in King Stainton, a small village in southern Devonshire. Hugh was employed as a travelling salesman for Simmons's Brewery, and he did very, very well. Simmons's was eventually taken over by Courage's, and when that happened, he was promoted to be the district manager in Exeter. So we moved to Exeter. This is the house we moved to in Wayland Avenue, and we at this time would be myself, my mother, my father, and my grandmother Ruby. This move worked out very well for me because I moved away from a very poor school in King Stainton, and my family got me into a private school in Exeter called Mount Radford. This is a picture of the school taken in 1963, and a prize for guessing which one of these is me. Time's up. That's me right there. But this was an expensive education, particularly for us. so my mother had to go out and work. So she took a job with British Rail at St David's Station in Exeter. Needless to say, she was their accountant. My father continued to do very well in his job and eventually was promoted to be the area manager of the Southern District of Courage, Berkeley and Simmons. And so we had to move to Portsmouth. This is the house in Blake Road which we moved to. And it had the most stunning view from the backyard. This is the view over Langston Harbour to the bottom right. You can see the harbour itself with all the boats. The city of Portsmouth is off to the right, and on a clear day, which this isn't, you can see the Isle of Wight. From this vantage point you can see the coming and going of the big ocean liners from Southampton, including the Queen Mary and the Queen Elizabeth II, and many of the big naval ships. This is one of our rare family photographs. Ivy is on the left, Hugh is on the right, and I'm not quite sure what they're seeing up in the tree, but they're not paying attention to the camera. Ruby is here in the middle, and that's me in the background at age about 16 or 17. Hugh died a few years after that photograph was taken. I got married. This is my wife Yvonne here in the white. Ivy is standing on my left with Ruby on the far left. And Yvonne's mother and father are on the right and her grandmother is the far right. This is the back of our house, taken some years later, showing the sunroom that Ivy had built on the back. And she absolutely loved sitting in this sun lounge, looking at the view and enjoying the sunshine. In the meantime, Yvonne and I had moved to the United States, and my mother and grandmother made several visits to us there. On the far left, they're pictured looking back over the city of Annapolis. You can just see the Annapolis Naval Academy over my mother's right shoulder. This is my mother playing with our dog, Santa Paws. The two of them used to love playing ball together. They'd do this for hours and hours and hours. And my grandmother and father lived in the United States from 1921 to 1938. So this was very much a homecoming for my grandmother. And this is a picture of them down in Florida visiting the Kennedy Space Center. We moved to California and my mother came to visit us out there. One summer she came out and decided our fence needed painting. Now note the thermometer on the fence there is showing a temperature of over 100 degrees. But she's out there still painting the fence and complaining about how hot it was. She also came out at Christmas one time, and here she is with Santa and Santa's favourite Christmas ball. There were several other visits to California. Top left, the three Mrs. Strongs are together at a brunch in the old mill, which I now think is defunct, but obviously Yvonne is finding something exceedingly funny to laugh at. As I mentioned, my grandmother came out to the United States in 1921 and she came out on the Queen Mary. So we went down to Long Beach to see the Queen Mary, which is housed there, and here they are standing under the propeller of the Queen Mary. Another dwarfing picture is the top right. We took them up to see the redwoods in the Sierras, and there they are standing under one of the larger redwood trees. You can just about see them at this scale. We also took them one Christmas time up to Lake Tahoe. You can just see the lake in the background there. It obviously had snowed, and this is with two of our friends, Tom and Larry. Bottom right is when we took them up to see Yosemite, and the falls in the background there are the Bridal Veil Falls. In later years, Mum couldn't travel anymore, and so she stayed pretty much at home. There's a picture of her out having a Christmas dinner with one of her neighbours. Even later in, say, 2005 and beyond, she became very reclusive. She wouldn't let anybody into the house. This is a picture taken by one of her neighbours when she answered the door. Eventually she fell in the house and couldn't get up, and actually she nearly died. But the National Health System came through and preserved her. And for the next 5 years, for the last 5 years of her life, she spent in the Haven Rest Home in Drayton, just below the house where she used to live. In preparing this, I found a quote by George Washington which best reflects my view of my mother. I'll read it. "My mother was the most beautiful woman I ever saw. All I am I owe to my mother. I attribute all my success in life to the moral, intellectual and physical education I received from her. I miss her."